Welcome back to part 3 of the 7-part mini-series on how to write effective diet plans. So in yesterday's lesson, we learned about energy balance and how to manipulate energy balance either to lose body fat or to increase lean muscle mass. What we're going to cover today is the macronutrients. So the macronutrients are those nutrients which our body requires in large amounts. We have 3 primary macronutrients. So we have protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Protein are the building blocks of all our cells in the body. So the body uses protein for growth and repair, while carbohydrates and fats are used for energy. As a rule of thumb, the protein intake is set in relation to a person's body weight or their lean body mass, and it tends to remain fairly constant, whereas the carbohydrate and fats tend to be inversely proportional, and they tend to be set as a percentage of total daily energy expenditure. So with regard to protein intake, what the literature seems to suggest is if muscle growth is the goal, there's not really much benefit going above 2 grams per kilo, especially for a natural trainee. But for fat loss, there is actually benefit to going maybe up to 3, even 3.5 grams per kilo because of 2 reasons. Number one, protein is the most thermogenic macronutrient. So what that means is your body requires more energy to digest protein than either carbohydrate and fat. So in essence, you metabolize less of the calories you take for protein because they're going towards digestion. Let's say you consume 2,000 calories and you had a high protein intake, you may end up metabolizing only about 1,700 of those 2,000 calories, and the rest are being used as energy for digestion. But if you consume 2,000 calories with a low protein intake, you may metabolize up to 1,900 calories. So one of the benefits to high protein intake during dieting or when you're going for fat loss is that you metabolize less of the energy and you burn off more of the energy in digestion. The second reason for maintaining high protein intake is satiety. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient. So what that means is it keeps you fuller for longer. Now, when you're dieting, if it keeps you fuller for longer, you're actually less likely to overeat. Okay? And as we know, consistency and compliance is the most important factor for your results on a diet. So that's the 2 reasons why high protein intake is beneficial during dieting periods. Also, during a diet phase, some research suggests that higher protein intake is able to spare lean muscle tissue better than lower protein intake. Now, with relation to the carbohydrate and fat, like we said, they tend to be inversely proportional. So if one goes up, the other one must come down. As a rule of thumb, in physiology, everything can be defined along a continuum, okay? And generally the distribution looks like a bell curve, the distribution among the population, where you have a small percentage of outliers, so 16% outliers at one extreme, 16% of people tend to be outliers at the other extreme, and then the majority of people tend to fall in the middle of the curve. So you have a small percentage of the population that tend to tolerate carbohydrates really well. Okay, so these people generally will be very insulin sensitive, or they tend to be slow oxidizers. So what happens is they burn through carbohydrates slowly, so it gives them sustained and prolonged energy, and they feel good on carbohydrates. On the other hand, they tend to be inefficient fat oxidizers. So if you increase their fat intake, they'll feel sluggish, they'll feel bloated, they may feel constipated, and they don't function as well on a higher fat intake. On the other end of the spectrum, okay, so while these people may need to go up to 70% of their total calories from carbohydrates, we have people that tend to tolerate carbohydrates very poorly. So these people either tend to be insulin resistant or they tend to be fast oxidizers. So they burn through carbs really quick, and what happens is blood sugar levels soars, then they crash. So what happens is their energy levels tanks, and their appetite then shoots through the roof. So these people, if they consume high carbs, especially high glycemic carbs, they'll tend to eat more and they tend to move less. And that's why they end up gaining weight and feeling poorly on a higher carbohydrate diet. So for these people, you may need to reduce carbohydrates below 20% of the total daily energy intake, even in some cases 10% or less. The majority of the people, okay, the majority of the population are going to fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. So that's about 68 or 70% of the population. They'll do best on a moderate amount of carbohydrates, so maybe about 30 to 40%, and a moderate amount of fat, okay? Because remember, carbohydrates burn really fast. So if you have too many carbs, you will crash. Fats, on the other hand, burn slow. So if you have too many fats, you will feel sluggish. So if you're a mixed oxidizer, you'll generally do best having a moderate amount of each, which will keep you stable and give you good energy and hold you till your next meal. Okay, so for the majority of people, that's the strategy you want to use. In tomorrow's lesson, we'll specifically look at nutrient timing, and for different types of people, what's the best time of the day to consume carbs, protein, and so forth. So I hope that was useful for you today, and I'll see you tomorrow when we do nutrient timing. Thank you.